Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Dean's Roundtable this afternoon, Tuesday afternoon. I'm really pleased to introduce Mr. Clifford Kendall, who has a BS from St. John's University and an MBA from Pace University. He currently serves as President and Chief Executive Officer and a member of the Board of Directors of Aquestive Therapeutics, Incorporated. Prior to being named CEO, Mr. Kendall served as co-president and chief operating officer of the company. He's been with Aquestive and its predecessor company, MonoSol Rx, LLC, since 2006. From 1999 till then, 2006, Mr. Kendall served in various business leadership positions for Hewlett-Packard, most recently as managing director of Hewlett-Packard Financial Services. He's also held a number of positions with AT&T from 1985 to 1998, including president of AT&T Credit Corporation and NCR Credit Corporation. He also served in the board of directors of Midatech Pharmacy PLC from 2010 to 2014. As I mentioned, Mr. Kendall holds an MBA from the Lubin School at Pace University, and we're really, really honored to have him with us this afternoon. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Kendall and encourage him to say a few words about himself. Mr. Kendall, thank you.
Sure. Dean Singleton, thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today? Good. So I'm going to, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but I don't want to spend all the time talking at you. So I want to make this the most interesting time or valuable time for you that we can make it. So to the extent that you have questions or areas you want to make sure I opine on or talk about, please let me know that right after I introduce myself a little bit, and I'll make sure that my comments touch those particular subjects. Is that a deal? Everybody okay? All right. So as Dean Singleton said, my name is Keith Kendall. I grew up in New York. I grew up actually in Brooklyn, spent most of my life there. No, Brooklyn was not discovered in 2005 when the first person moved into Williamsburg. It's actually been there for a long time. I constantly, as my children explore the city, and I have 4, surprise them when they say, hey, I found this great spot in wherever. And I said, oh, I went there when I was in high school. And they can't believe that the world didn't start in Brooklyn in 2005. Anyway, I grew up in Brooklyn. I did go for my undergraduate degree to St. John's University in Queens. I graduated with an accounting degree and a minor in economics. Now, as we get on to this, you'll understand I never intended to be an accountant. I never wanted to be an accountant, but it was a means to an end. I did also get a degree at Pace University, and I got an MBA there. My, I guess, minor or subspecialty in that was actually in controllership, which was also another accounting type of function for someone who never wanted to be an accountant. So I started my career actually while I was an undergraduate. I had always thought that I wanted to actually be in the FBI. I was telling a story to Dean Singleton and Erica a minute ago that just before I started my undergraduate studies, I took a psychological profile career preference test that was very popular at the time. And the test told me that the most enjoyable professions I could enter into was going to be being a race car driver or a farmer. So here I am working as an executive in a business very far from a race car driver or a farmer. So much for those tests, right? But what I did want, what I did believe I wanted, was I believed I wanted to be an FBI agent. And at the time, in order to be in the FBI, you needed to be an accountant or a lawyer. So I studied accounting undergraduate, and I got myself into law school. When I graduated college in 1979, I had to make a decision. at the time, right? So I did pursue a career at the FBI, but I had to start working and supporting myself. Not long after I graduated, I started a family and had to support them as well. I ultimately got appointed to the FBI and got invited to Quantico to begin my training. And I realized that the picture that I had of the FBI and the reality of the FBI were very, very different. They told me when I was appointed that I would likely move 15 to 19 times during my first 20 years. And that I would not likely be able to stay in the New York area for very long, having been a New Yorker. And I wasn't really quite sure that I wanted to move my family around that much over the course of my time. So I actually turned down the appointment to Quantico and focused more fully on my career. By the time I turned down the appointment at Quantico, I was working for AT&T. Now, AT&T at that time was a very different company than you might all know today as DirecTV and cell phones, right? AT&T at the time was called Ma Bell. It was the phone company around the world, actually. AT&T was the largest private enterprise in the Western world, bar none. To give you a sense of its size at the time, there were only 2 larger fleets of vehicles in the Western world than AT&T had, and that was the U.S. military and the U.S. Post Office. So it was a very, very big company, and I was an accountant going into AT&T, deep into the bowels of AT&T, and I had just given up the thing that I thought I wanted to be as I was growing up. So I'm not going to tell you a glittery story about how PACE changed my life. I'll tell you how and why I got to PACE, but I will tell you 2 things I learned at PACE that changed the course of how I behaved in terms of managing my career. I worked just across the street from the main campus on Broadway and Fulton Street. So I won't lie, convenience was one of the dimensions of value that I saw in PACE at the time, given the fact that I had one small child and another on the way, and I worked just across the street. Convenience was important, but before I got to convenience, what I got about PACE was it was in New York, and it had access to business leaders that I thought would be important to me as I tried to learn how to manage my career. I was, whatever I was, 23 or 24 at the time. And PACE did not disappoint me. There were 2 courses during my MBA that I actually took quite a bit away from. One of them was actually a course called controllership. Now remember, I'm an accountant who never wanted to be an accountant, right? And I'm in a course in graduate school called controllership. That probably sounds a little bit of a disconnect, right? But it turned out that we met every Tuesday and Thursday. The professor was the president and CEO of a large publishing company. And during the entire semester, we never once talked about accounting. We never once talked about debits or credits, and we never once talked about accounting policy and rules. What we talked about, and what the takeaway for me that changed probably the trajectory of my early career, was we talked about all of the problems you could solve based on the data and or information that the controllership of a company had at its fingertips. How, by understanding what the numbers mean or imply, and by interacting with the people who generated those numbers, you could understand what was going on in the business. So you could, even very low in the organization, get a great view of the whole business if you were so inclined. And that was a very important lesson to me. My position as an accountant became a learning opportunity. It became a place for me to suck in a lot of information about how a business works and what happens when it does certain things and how that looks in a financial statement. So that was one thing that I took away. And the second course was actually strategic planning. I had never, at AT&T, at a huge organization like that, as an entry-level accountant, I was so far away from strategy, you needed a moonshot to get close, right? My ability to get close to strategy in a company of that size was probably very, very slight. But what strategic planning taught me was how to expand my view, how to look at why a company does things, how to look at the environment it's in and how it affects what you're trying to do. And it also taught me that for an organization to perform, everyone in the organization has to understand a couple of things, right? And even to this day, and I've been the leader of businesses for over 30 years, some very, very large, billions of dollars, and some small, like Aquestive. But what I have told people in the organizations that I have led was every person in the company has a right to understand where the company's going, why it's going there, and what their role in that is, right? And I got that from that strategic planning course and the professor who tried to teach us the value of that. And that's been a principle of mine throughout my career. PACE gave me, in the education that it gave me tools that helped me manage my career. And it taught me some principles that I have managed myself and led businesses based on since I've graduated from PACE. I'll take a breath there and give you all an opportunity to take the rest of the conversation in a direction that's interesting to you, because I'm sure you don't want to hear more about, what I did during my time in college and early part of my career.
I have a question for you, sir. Brian Comandini, nice to meet you.
Hey, Brian.
Which attributes in your career had the biggest impact in preparing you to become an executive?
So the way I would describe it, the way I would talk to people is I would say you have to be values or principle based, right? You've got to have a set of principles that drive you and that become your framework for acting and decision making and setting expectations of you over your career. I'll give you a couple that are what I describe when I have this conversation with people in our company or with investors who ask about our company. I would say these things are molecular to me, right? They are in my core. The first is hope is not a strategy. You own what happens, right? You own your career, you own your happy, you own whether you're in a job or you're in a career and doing something you love, right? You own every outcome that you could have controlled by your action or inaction. No one else owns that, right? So if you find yourself saying, boy, I hope this happens, you are not doing something you should be doing. You should have a plan that has 6 or 7 legs on it based on whatever permutation may be able to happen, right? If you walk through Aquestive right now and within the first 10 minutes you didn't hear people talk about optionality, then I have failed, right? Hope is not a strategy. The other principle that I would say is molecular to me is there is no success without collaboration. I don't care what single participant sport you pick. I don't care what single participant freelance business you pick. There's no such thing as success without collaboration. 2 heads are always better than 1, and 3 are always better than 2. And a good idea can come from anywhere. And if you don't respect that, and don't know how to communicate, collaborate, and cooperate with the people around you, you will leave money on the table, whether it's money, green money, or figuratively satisfaction and psychic income. So those are, I would say, two that are absolutely molecular to me. And in every business I've led, have been the bedrock of how people perform and approach the goals in front of them. You know, on a personal note, when you start to manage your career, I would say the other equation is you have to decide whether you want to be a commodity or a brand, right? A commodity is simply an economic exchange for some erg of energy that you output, right? And then you go home. Now that may be perfect for you. That may be exactly what you're looking for. And that's great. If you're looking for more, if you're looking for psychic income, more responsibility, greater economic opportunity, you have to be a brand, right? And to be a brand, people have to say, I need Brian, right? Why do I need Brian? He's a problem solver. He's a great communicator. He's great to work with. He gets to the goal line. He doesn't give up. You build a brand. You be a brand or you be a commodity, right? And you have to decide early on, like where you are in your careers now, which of those you really want to be. And then you have to act accordingly, right? If you want to be a brand, the other thing I will say to you is you need to go to Costco and buy yourself a great big bag of question marks, right? Too many people speak with the wrong punctuation marks. The right punctuation mark is a question mark. Why are we doing this? How does it affect the people downstream from me? Why are the people upstream from me doing what they're doing? What's the goal we're trying to get to? Speak in question marks. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but always understand how you fit in, right? And those are the things that will drive you. Again, I'll stop here and take a breath and let somebody ask me a clarifying question, say, dummy, that's not what we asked you, say something else, right?
I do actually have a follow-up question to what you just said. So you talked about being a brand and how that's important, but that does mean constantly kind of trying to differentiate yourself from maybe your coworkers. So can that kind of get in the way of the spirit of being collaborative that you were also talking about? Or like that concept of maybe being a step ahead of everyone else? Can that become maybe a problem when you're trying to collaborate, and how would you deal with that?
Sure, that's a great question. And there's actually two questions in there. I'll separate the difference, right? You first have to ask yourself, what is my highest organizing principle, right? I'm managing my life and my career. What's my highest organizing principle? Is my highest organizing principle that everybody is going to like me? Or is my highest organizing principle that I'm going to be successful, right? Because no matter how you behave, there are going to be people who don't want to work like you want to work. And there are going to be people that complain because you got something because of your work that they didn't get. They feel entitled. Well, Anna got it, why didn't I? You differentiate yourself by your work. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be an SOB. That doesn't mean you have to be a nasty, mean person, right? You can communicate, you can interact with people in a very positive way and still excel, even if they don't, right? You want to put your best work forward in whatever way that you can, according to your principles of interacting with people. I guarantee you, as nice of a person as you are, and I can tell you are a really nice person, okay, someone you thought you liked is going to hate you at some point in your career because you did something they wouldn't, not couldn't, wouldn't. You don't care about that, because until they pay your mortgage, they don't get to say what you do, right? And you don't have to be a mean person, okay? You don't have to be a mean person. You just have to understand what your highest organizing principle is and what it takes to get there, right? They don't want to do the extra work. They don't want to say, okay, I have to go home, I have to do something, but I'm going to sign back on at 10 o'clock at night, right? They want to come in and they want to throw up on the table and tell you about all the problems, but they don't want to say how we're going to clean it up, right? You differentiate yourself by being that person every day. If they don't want to do it, that's their problem. That's not your problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Dean Singleton, am I being too rough around the edges or am I okay?
I think you're spot on. I think this is great. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so I do have a couple of questions. Oh, Suzanne, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Suzanne, you go first.
I'm on the faculty. I teach auditing. In the business schools, as you know, we're always teaching ethics. You know, we're supposed to teach ethics no matter what our major is. So this is around a story, and then you can comment in any way you want. You talked about brand and culture, and about the time you were at AT&T, my best friend's brother, who I knew all my life, was in a serious car accident. He worked for AT&T. His wife burned up in the car, and his 6-month-old baby burned up in the car, and his 1.5-year-old baby burned up in the car. He was covered with burns all over his body. He was in the hospital for 2 years. He worked for AT&T. AT&T took care of everything, including all of his surgeries for many years, kept his jobs. And when he came back, he had a job. I tell that story because it kind of tugs at your heart, but I've always had the highest respect, quote, branding, about AT&T. So I guess if you can bring ethics into this, from that story, I don't know. I just think that ethics is so important to our students, so they know where that fits into the corporate culture.
Right. Look, I think companies are like people, right? They have a soul. They have a personality. They have a way that they desire themselves to be viewed, right? Some are more purposeful about that than others. Others kind of stumble into what their reputation becomes. But a company has a soul. And one of the things that we talk about at Aquestive, and from all the way back in my time at AT&T, we always taught people that we're in this business together. We all succeed. And if we all succeed, everybody gets additional opportunity. And we work to make sure of that. We work to make sure our compensation plans do that. We work to make sure we behave that way. And we also tell them that we are a part of a community. We're part of the communities we live and work in. And we have to be good members of that community because we think that's important. So when you look at the things we do over the course of a year, we have a number of events. We have 2 main locations, one in Indiana outside of Gary, and one here in New Jersey, just about 30 miles or 35 miles from the Lower Manhattan campus. We do community programs a few times a year where we either we donate, but then we involve all the people in the company. We give them a day. And we'll take them to the food bank. We'll build bicycles for Christmas and the holiday time. We'll do food drives. We'll do a back to school drive, but then we'll go and we'll distribute at the same time. So it's not just a blind contribution that someone or the company does. We do that because we want people to understand that they're all in this together in some way. So when something terrible like what you described happens, if the company's soul is such that it believes people are part of something, not just an economic deal for work during the day, you get that kind of behavior. I learned a lot about principled organization and ethics and the soul of a company. As hard as it is to believe, you get it from a giant company like AT&T at the time. but I learned a lot about that from AT&T. And I think that's important. I think that's an important aspect of how, as you all go to look for a place to start or continue your career, you understand whether or not the company you're talking to shares the values you do, is the environment you want to live in. You're shopping as much as they are, and don't be afraid to shop. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. I tell my own children, when they go for interviews or are thinking, I don't necessarily ask them what answers they're going to give to the questions they're going to get. I question them about what questions are you going to ask? How do you know this is the right place for you? And you have to ask those questions. A company has a soul. You have to figure out what the soul is and whether it's a place you want to be, right? So that was a great question, Suzanne. Thank you. I hope I got to your.
That's a great answer. Great answer.
Okay, is that Ileana who wanted to ask the next question?
Yes, that was me. Thank you.
Okay.
So the first question is, what was the most inspiring project you've worked on, and what keeps you motivated?
Wow. So maybe I'll take a little bit of a roundabout way to the answer to that. I told you that I was an accounting major, 2 degrees with an accounting major, but I never wanted to be an accountant. I knew very early on I never wanted to be an accountant. In fact, at St. John's, it was a bit of a prestigious thing to get on-campus interviews, which were at the time the Big 8 accounting firms. And I was lucky to get on-campus interviews for all 8. I sold them to other students because I didn't want to be an accountant. That's how badly I didn't want to be an accountant. I also, in AT&T, just as I was getting my career going, I got to be the head of a couple of different businesses, including the largest financial business within AT&T. I figured out really quickly that what I really, really didn't like was being in a business where every year I had to talk about raising revenue 8% and cutting costs 6%. I just wasn't into that stability and that sameness. So if you look at my career, depending on how you count, I've been part of 6 startup companies. That's what really jazzed me. That's where I got really excited, starting new things and growing them to be big, right? AT&T Capital Corporation, I had badge number 4. I couldn't wait to leave big AT&T to go to that startup as fast as I could. And I left the president of the largest business unit within AT&T Capital. I helped start Compact Capital, which ultimately was merged into HP when those 2 companies came together. We were the only place in the merger where the pre-merger Compact team wound up leading the post-merger HP business. So in HP Financial Services, all the leadership was Compact leadership. And we had a 2 or 3 year turnaround job ahead of us. Then I got to a place where I had a really big business in finance, and I got tired of having the conversation about I need to do 5% more revenue and cut costs 10%. So I went and I did the same thing again. Changed industries completely, but little tiny company that which was MonoSol Rx, the precursor to the current Aquestive. They had a small technology, a proprietary technology in the pharmaceutical business, which I knew nothing about. But I really liked the technology and I really liked the opportunity, and I got to pursue my dream of starting up a company that ultimately became a public company and grew to be a meaningful business. A funny story, when I was at HP or AT&T, I never once in all of the combined years in those 2 businesses did I ever talk about cash. there was always enough cash to do what we were doing, right? And in the last business that I led at HP, it was about a $5 billion portfolio doing about $2 billion worth of revenue a year. When I started interviewing, when the board or the investors in MonoSol reached out to me and I went to talk to them, one of the times I went to talk to them, they showed me the business plan. And I started to see some single-digit numbers in the business plan. So I asked, are these thousands or millions? And they said, no, they're actual dollars. So I went from a $5 billion portfolio to a line on the business plan that was $5 for office supplies. Right? I went from corporate jets and the Ritz-Carlton to the Holiday Inn and having to pick up my own rent-a-car, which I needed my secretary's help to teach me. But it was the most exciting thing. The startups that I've been a part of, back to your question, I told you I'd get back to your question. The startups that I've been a part of have been the things that have given me the most psychic income or pleasure in my career. I just love that phase of putting all the pieces together, solving the problems, getting it started, and then helping it continue to grow. So those are the things that have really turned me on in my career.
Okay, I have another one.
Okay.
Getting back to culture and the soul of a company, building good culture is one thing. Sustainability of good culture is another. What is your advice for sustaining great culture throughout your company, and what parties help you with that?
Sure, that's a great question. Culture is just habit over a long period of time, right? It becomes understood and it becomes taken for granted. In order to build habit and to build culture, you have to be principle and value driven. You have to be very clear to the organization what's important to you, right? The number one value that we espouse in Aquestive is safety of our patients and our colleagues, the people who work in the company. So when the COVID pandemic comes down the road and you have to figure out what to do, your number one value better be the way you behave and make all your decisions, or nobody follows you. You can't create habit. You can't repeat action if you don't have principles and values that you drive. Collaboration. If you believe in collaboration, I told you it was molecular to me. Every action you take has to show that you support that. So when someone comes and says, hey, I'm going to do this, this, and this, you say, did you talk to Ileana? She's got a part of that. Did you talk to Brian? He's got a part of that. Why don't you and Ileana and Brian and Anna get together and tell me what the answer is? You drive collaboration. When you solve problems, you put teams of people together who have relevant knowledge so that people learn that the right way to do things is by collaborating, by making sure you've thought about your problems from every angle of the Rubik's Cube, or what we call facets, every facet of the gem, right? So you create value by first making sure you're very clear about your principles. You create culture by making sure that the tone from the top is consistent, not only in what people hear, but more importantly, what people see every day, right? I have to be sure that the executives that join the company believe those principles so they could live them. They have to be sure that they bring people into the organization who understand and respect those principles and can live them. And then people who don't fit have to leave, right? We invite people to practice their craft somewhere else all the time because behaviorally, they're just not a fit. They're not truthful, they're not collaborative, they're not transparent. All of the things that underlie good performance in an organization. And if people don't fit, they have to go. And that's ultimately how you get to a culture.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Josie.
Hi, Josie. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I love your background screen.
Oh, thank you very much. So my question is, so is it bold to ask that question in an interview and say, hey, like, what is your values? What is your mission? And is it an alarming sign if the people that you're interviewing with don't know the answer or can't really give you something succinct when they're talking to you about it?
Well, look, when I was growing up, and where you guys are, you know, whenever the school, not necessarily PACE, but whenever any of the places where I was gave you coaching about interview skills, they always told you, ask, well, where do you see the company 3 or 5 years from now, right? That's just a different flavor of the same question. However, the answer to where's the company going to be 3 to 5 years from now is a very small part of what you want to know to understand if the company's right for you, right? How do I fit into the mission? How do people behave? What are the values of the company? What will I expect as I do my role for my peers and other colleagues? How would I expect them to treat me? You have every right to make a decision about the company as much as the company has a right to make a decision about you. Now you can balance those in different measures based on your situation, right? But you have a right to know those things. And I actually believe that if someone's starting their career and they're smart enough to ask questions like that and can really tie the conversation together, that's very impressive. If I get to the middle management layer of the company and they're not asking those questions, I don't want them, because they're making the decision to come to the job for the wrong reasons, right? Where's the company going? Why is it going there? And how do I fit in? And if you're not interested in understanding those things, it's certainly when you get to the middle layer of management, you're not the right person for us, right? But early on, you have every right to ask in the right, you know, in the right tone of voice, of course. You know, what is the company's mission? What is it? What are its values? How do I fit in to what the company is trying to accomplish? Are all great ways to start a dialogue with the company to understand whether it's right for you or not.
Following up on that, just in case the students want to know, and I'm sure they will, how would you make your resume stand out? What is it that you, as an employer or reading or looking at resumes, do you think that would make students stand out more?
So I may not be able to do justice in the modern resume world, right? Where there are keywords and there are search engines that cull through those keywords. But when you talk about yourself, whether it's on paper or it's live, you need to talk about the things that you've contributed, right? You're not blowing a trumpet necessarily and being overly crass about I'm great, but it really is, I've done these things, I've contributed this way, and it implies, or you say, I have these skills and this is how it will help your organization. Another reason why knowing where a company thinks it's going and how you fit in is important, because then when you talk to people, you can talk about, I have done this, I have this experience, I have accomplished these things in these ways, and I believe that is helpful to you. And what you've described to me is what you're trying to accomplish or what this role is really all about. So you talk about what you've accomplished and you talk about what you've contributed, right? You're a part of something, how you've been a part of something. That's what I think is important, that you have developed expertise or experience, or you've been part of activities that make you valuable in some way. You don't have to know how to build a nuclear weapon. You don't have to know how to cure cancer. You have to know how to behave, be part of a team, and have some traits that can contribute to success. And that's what you have to seek to be able to accomplish to the extent that you can. And again, I'm an old guy, a lot of white hair, so my job seeking days are very different than what you confront today. But knowing as much about the company you're going to, including talking to the person you might be interviewing with, if you know who that is, and say, hey, I want to be prepared. What are the kinds of things you'd like to talk about? And show that initiative and then be prepared is probably one of the best ways for you to differentiate yourself. You need to be prepared, know where you're going, know who you're talking to, what's going to be important to them, and show yourself as a solution to the problem they have.
I have a question.
Sure.
Nice to meet you. I'm Sheikh, an exchange student at Pace. When you have had like the opportunity to launch to lead so successful businesses, do you at some point felt like you needed to leave your position and go to launch your own business? And if yes, in which field?
Did you? It was your question. The sound is a little garbled through my little camera, so let me make sure I understand your question. As I was leading some of these businesses, did I ever feel that there was a time when I had to leave?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. As I said to you guys before, you're responsible for your happy, right? Only you know what your happy is. Only you know where you get psychic income from, and you're satisfied or you're jazzed up by what you're doing. So as much as I love starting things, once they get to a certain place and I'm having the same conversation every budget cycle, that's not interesting to me anymore. So if you look at my last job change, which now is 15 years ago, I was in that situation. I had just turned around a very big business. It was at the point where you just sell a little more this year, you cut costs a little more this year. And that just didn't do it for me. I was so determined to do something new. I changed industries, right? I went to an industry I had never been a part of and didn't know very much about. And I went to a group, to a company that had 12 people in it and was managing their business plan with $5 items on the budget line compared to millions, right? So yeah, there comes a time where I don't want a job, right? I don't want a straight economic exchange for ergs of energy for 8 hours a day. I want to feel jazzed by what I'm doing. I want to feel energy. I love solving problems with people and organizing people around problems and accomplishing those. And that's what I think I'm good at. So it was time. I was not a happy person to be around. And as the leader of the largest financial business, if I wasn't happy, that means I got snarky. I made other people sad. I didn't want to be that kind of person, right? I wanted to be excited to go to work every day. So I changed and I took a really big risk. But it was to do what really turned me on. Only you can decide where on that continuum you want to be, right? Between a job at one extreme where you're simply getting paid and you're going home, you got no worries, or you want to be on the other side where you're more involved, you're more energized by what you do every day, and you're down and you're on a path. And you have to decide what's best for you, your family, and how you feel. But yeah, there is a time where if you're not happy getting up and going there in the morning, and I don't mean just because you had a bad day, I mean, in general, the situation is not good, then yeah, it's time to do something else.
Thank you.
So yeah, go ahead, Ileana.
Okay. So when you are meeting with candidates for your executive team, are there some key things that send a red flag to you that ultimately give you a pause?
Yes. The number of times they say "I" is the first thing, right? When I'm interviewing, and in our company, obviously someone on the executive leadership team I have to interview, and then anybody who joins the next layer of the organization, right? I interview. I start my interview with your questions. Okay, if you got to me, you've seen at least 5 or 6 other people. You've been in the process for a couple of weeks. You've had a chance to do some research. What can I tell you? If you're not asking me the right questions, you won't even spend the hour you had scheduled with me. I've walked people out of my office after the first question they asked and said, you're not the right person. So you're going to ask what question was so egregious? Well, the question that the person started with was, how are you going to make me, the candidate, successful and rich? And I said, time out, you're in the wrong spot. That's not who we are. If you don't understand we're all in this together and you've got an obligation, I can't help you with that. You should go home now. And they did. So it's the questions that people ask that are my red flags. If you've done a little homework and you've connected all of the conversations you had and you engage me in those questions, I'm very, very happy. I'm very, very happy. And I'm absolutely not parochial at all about areas of discipline. So the chief operating officer of our company, who's responsible for all the science, all of the R&D, all of the regulatory work with the government, is a guy who started as a business planner. He was a budget guy, and he worked his way up through different jobs around the company until he made himself so valuable that he became the chief operating officer. So I don't really care in a pharmaceutical company whether you're a doctor or a chemist. I care about who can lead and who can accomplish.
I have a follow-up question to that. Is there an appropriate way people should go about negotiating compensation salaries?
Yeah, it's easy for me to say, right? So I'll try to make it as practical as you can. Look, it's a game, right? You know it, I know it. Every hiring manager knows it. Every candidate knows it. When we ask how much you make, you raise that number that from what it truly is in most cases, and we have to figure out what the real truth is, right? The truth of the matter is that we look at the role, the amount of experience you have, and we look at how the market pays that role, and we establish a range, right? And if you come in and you establish yourself and your background and your experience so that you fit the job, then we want to get you in that range as best we can, right? And if we want really good talent and we want those people to come and be happy they're here, we really don't want their negotiation to be a very unhappy experience, right? You want everybody to come away and say, you know what, I didn't get everything I wanted, but I'm happy, right? And you have to try to find that spot. For the candidate has to know what their value is, what the role's value is. You can't just throw a crazy number out and say, this is what I want, because then we're going to say, why do you think you're worth that much when the market says this? So you have to be knowledgeable about the market, but you also have to not be shy about saying, when somebody asks you, what are you looking for, right? Early on, you say, let's make sure we're a fit before we get to that conversation and be comfortable pushing it off. And later in the process, when someone says that, say, look, I believe that I can add a great deal of value to your company and I want X. And I know that it's historical to have this kind of bonus or this kind of sign on or this kind of option opportunity, and not be shy about it. I don't mean don't be shy about crazy number, but don't be shy about being direct about it. The worst that they could say is no. And if you're not crazy high on your number, you're not going to scare anybody out of the negotiation, right? There's a basic law in negotiation which says you don't negotiate with crazy. So if your number is crazy, I'm turning off. I'm not giving you a number to try to average down to your spot. I'm just turning you off, right? Be in the range, know what you're talking about, and don't be shy about saying, this is what I'm looking for.
Can I get on to that?
Yeah.
Suzanne again. A real story that you got to be careful how you ask for something. I worked for AXA in the internal audit department. And one night at 7 o'clock at night, we found out that a guy who came had been working for us for 5 weeks, and we loved him. We found out that he lied about the salary when whoever asked, how much do you make? And he lied about it, and found out at 7 o'clock at night. The next morning at 9 o'clock, that was brought up with 6 directors. And at 11 o'clock, security came, took his computer and walked him out of the company, and he was gone. It was all because he lied about the question that was asked. Because you don't have to answer the question either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And look, earlier in your career, you have to comply with that process. Later on in your career, you can push that process back and you can say, look, this is about a fair exchange for what I can bring to your company for the compensation that I'm looking for, right? And you don't have to let yourself fall into that trap. When you're dealing with, HR administrators who are the early part of the selection, the search and selection process, you're going to come across that, right? And early in your career, you might have to comply. I wouldn't encourage you to lie. I would encourage you to negotiate, not negotiate by lying, because the act of lying, if they do check and find out, immediately casts a shadow over your integrity, and you don't want that, right? Better to deal with it in a negotiation and say, I was expecting something a little bit more, and I'd like to get to this number, than lie to try to get to that number surreptitiously. It's not going to serve you well at the end of the day.
Is it practical for someone like me? Like I'm a veteran, so I'm not like coming out of school as a 23-year-old or however old you come out of school normally. I worked in the workforce for 7 years and, was making decent money when I was in the Coast Guard. Is it practical for me to try to say, hey, I was making this in the Coast Guard, even though the new role has nothing to do with that?
Well, I don't know how you can draw a correlation between government pay in any branch, right, and private sector pay. You are doing yourself a gigantic disservice if you let anyone peg you to your Coast Guard pay, right? That you especially have to be knowledgeable about what those roles are worth, right? And there's plenty of places for you to find that out, but you'd have to understand what the role is worth and what your experience in that role is worth to ask for what you want. But if I were you, I would never let anybody peg me to my government pay grade. It's just not appropriate.
Thank you. I agree.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one more.
All right, so how did I do? I'll ask the question. Was this useful? Did you get anything out of this? I wanted this to be valuable to you. I've blathered on for an hour. I want to make sure you got something out of it.
I thought it was really awesome to hear you speak and give insight. It was much appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, I bet you say that to all the guest speakers.
Only the
It was-
previous one.
It was some very unique insight, I have to say.
Please
You know,
come and speak
should-
to my
you should
class
see
for
me.
15 minutes.
You should see me in an unvarnished setting about interesting insights. But look, I hope I made this valuable for you and that you got something out of it. I know that Erica and Ileana have my email and my phone number. If you want to drop me a note and say you were on this call and you have a question or you want to chat, I'm happy to spend the time with you after we break the call up. But I hope I contributed something for you today.
You
Guys,
definitely.
Kathy is I'm Sophia. It's great honor to have you for us to listen your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
I just have an interesting way of
Professor
telling
O'Callaghan,
stories.
hi.
But thank you. Thank you.
Professor is my professor for my accounting.
Okay, so that's why you didn't ask any questions, because you didn't want your professor to see the questions you asked?
I'm her master student.
Well, I really want to thank you, Mr. Keith Kendall, for being with us today. Very valuable lessons that he shared with us the last hour or so. And I hope that we get to meet again and we get to meet in person. You know, when
I'd love to. I do much better in person, so I'd love to do that at some point once we're all allowed.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a small token of appreciation that I would like to hand you through the computer, but I can't do it. But it'll be on the way to you in the mail. But I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today.
My
very
pleasure.
good.
Thank you so
all
much,
very
Keith.
much. Have a great rest
It was
of the
great.
day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.